It can be hard for those who aren't politically engaged to make the connection, but there's a really direct relationship between the ability of our democracy to protect fundamental freedoms like speech, association, thought and belief, and its ability to solve problems, innovate and ultimately prosper in a way that benefits everyone. And yet, history has shown us that it is the very best way we yet know to give all people a chance to have their needs met and go on to live a life of meaning. So I get really worried when I see governments make moves that show they either don't appreciate the importance of these freedoms or they're too cowardly to defend them, or maybe even outright hostile. My next guest is Michelle Pearse. As CEO of the Australian Christian Lobby, she's been working tirelessly against an appalling move by the ACT government that undermines freedom of thought and belief. And she's written a fascinating piece recently for The Spectator, questioning whether the motive for the ACT government's decision to compulsorily acquire first Calvary Hospital and now Clare Holland House, which is Canberra's only inpatient end-of-life hospice, was really just about healthcare and land economics, or whether it reflects a broader hostility to people of faith who offer services to the community in a manner consistent with their ethos. Michelle, welcome to the program. Calvary Hospital operated in the Catholic worldview, which means it offered a choice of services consistent with their beliefs, particularly on life issues. But why does that seem to bother the ACT government so much?
Yes, Amanda, thank you for having me on the program tonight. And it really is concerning that the government took over the Calvary Hospital in such haste. And we do believe this was ideologically driven. And this should be pertinent and front of mind for Australian Christians and anybody who holds a religious ethos. So I'm glad you're bringing it to the program tonight, because news could easily move beyond this, because the acquisition has already happened. Yet this has implications not just for Canberrans, but for Australian Christians nationwide. And we do have reason to be concerned, and there is evidence leading up to the takeover which shows that this really was ideologically driven.
The compulsory acquisition of Calvary Hospital was challenged in court, but it could only be done on the question of whether the price paid represented just terms. But what about the non-financial matters that were taken away by the decision, like the ability of a person to get care reflective of their fundamental beliefs, for instance, such as at the end of their life? Was the value of freedom of conscience for patients or staff something that the court was able to consider?
I mean, you're exactly right. The financial issue is really down on the list in terms of the priorities of the Calvary Hospital. The Calvary Hospital has enjoyed freedom of conscience because it operates as a Catholic hospital. And so it's at risk because it no longer can operate according to its freedom of conscience. You know, in the first part of the bill, it states that in the Health Enabling Act that this wasn't a human rights issue. But this is a freedom of conscience issue, which means it is a human rights issue. And now, as we've seen the ACT government move hastily without community consultation to offend the freedom of conscience of a Catholic hospital, means that this could affect other Christian and Catholic institutions nationwide that currently have their freedom of conscience outworked within their Christian institution.
You've said that the issues that are raised are twofold. The first is the proper place of human rights in this context, which don't seem to have had a proper airing in the legal proceedings. But the second is whether an acquisition can ever be on just terms if it is motivated by an anti-religious sentiment, whether that's just to get a price from those who uphold that ethos contrary to prevailing ideology, or whether it's to try and make some sort of political point by taking a shot at people of faith. Michelle, Labor in the ACT and around the country talk a lot about human rights, but which human rights are affected here, and why don't they seem to matter to the government that seems to talk about them so much?
That's right, and it seems that freedom of conscience isn't within their interpretation of the human rights. We saw leading up to the implementation of this act In April, a Legislative Assembly committee report in the ACT recommended to the government that they need to push for the Calvary Hospital to implement full reproductive rights, including euthanasia. We also saw in April 2023 that the Calvary Hospital put in a submission to the government opposing euthanasia. Now, as many people know, the ACT government is planning to introduce some of the most extreme euthanasia laws in the country, making it even accessible to 14-year-olds. And there's a consistent push to open up access to abortion. And so to have this law introduced into Parliament 1 month after both of these occurrences, and then the acquisition date set to be only 5 weeks after this with no community consultation. In fact, the government passed a motion to actually circumvent the normal committee process to rush this bill through Parliament. Now, this is an ideological abuse on freedom of conscience, but the ACT government is yet to admit this. The Supreme Court hasn't seen this either, but we need to continue to push the federal Parliament to acknowledge that this was an ideological issue so the ACT government can inquire into this and we can see this injustice rectified.
Thank you very much, Michelle Pearse, for your advocacy on this issue.